5 words that shook the NBA. Nobody expected Victor Wembanyama to say it. Not after the heartbreak. Not after blowing one of the most painful finals series in recent memory. And definitely not after the basketball world watched him walk off the court without shaking a single hand. But just moments after the San Antonio Spurs watched the championship slip away, Victor Wembanyama stepped to the podium, looked around the room, and delivered 5 chilling words that instantly sent NBA fans into a frenzy. Appreciate y'all. See y'all never. That was it. No explanation, no smile, no follow-up, just 5 words. And suddenly, the story wasn't about the New York Knicks ending their championship drought. It wasn't about the trophy. It wasn't even about Jalen Brunson's incredible finals performance. The entire basketball world was talking about Victor Wembanyama. Was he taking a shot at New York? Was he calling out the media? Was he sending a message to Stephen A. Smith and every critic who spent months questioning whether he was truly ready for the biggest stage? Or was this something much deeper? Because what happened before those 5 words tells a story that most people completely missed. For months, Wembanyama had been carrying expectations that almost no player in NBA history had ever faced. Every game was analyzed. Every mistake was magnified. Every weakness became a headline. One week, people called him the future of basketball. The next week, they questioned whether his body could survive playoff basketball. One day, he was the MVP favorite. The next day, critics were asking whether he had enough toughness to lead a championship team. And through it all, one voice seemed to follow him everywhere. Stephen A. Smith, again and again. Smith challenged the young superstar, questioning his frame, questioning his readiness, questioning whether the hype was arriving faster than the results. Then came the playoffs. Then came the final. And suddenly the two-year-old wasn't just a prospect anymore. He wasn't just potential. He wasn't just a viral highlight machine. He was carrying the hopes of an entire franchise on the biggest stage in sports. For stretches of the finals, Wembanyama looked unstoppable. The Spurs controlled games, built leads, dominated stretches of play. But championships aren't won by dominating stretches. They're won by finishing. And that became San Antonio's nightmare. The bigger the lead, the harder the collapse. The closer they got to a title, the further it slipped away. By the time the final buzzer sounded, Wembanyama wasn't just dealing with defeat. He was dealing with something far more dangerous. A lesson that some of the greatest players in NBA history learned before becoming champions. Michael Jordan learned it. LeBron James learned it. Giannis Antetokounmpo learned it. And now Victor Wembanyama was learning it too. The question is this: what happens when a generational talent experiences his first truly devastating failure? Does he break? Or does he become something the rest of the league isn't ready for? Because if you listen carefully to everything that happened after Game 5, you might realize those 5 words weren't frustration at all. They sounded a lot more like a warning. If you're watching from anywhere around the world, let me know your city and country in the comments below. And if you believe Victor Wembanyama will return to the NBA Finals and win a championship, type 1" the comments right now. If you think the road will be much tougher than people expect, type 2. Don't forget to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear only gets crazier from here. The trophy was not the story. The Knicks had just done what generations of New York fans had been waiting to see. They had climbed the mountain. They had survived the pressure, the noise, the impossible expectations, and the weight of a city that treats every playoff possession like a life or death trial. Madison Square Garden was shaking. Players were falling into each other's arms. Cameras were chasing every celebration. Jalen Brunson, the heart of New York's run, had delivered the kind of finals performance that becomes part of a franchise's identity forever. But somehow, in the middle of that championship storm, the most replayed image of the night was not Brunson lifting the trophy. It was not the confetti. It was not the Knicks bench exploding. It was Victor Wembanyama turning away and disappearing into the tunnel. No handshake, no long embrace, no quiet words with the champions. Just a slow, cold walk away from the court where his first real NBA heartbreak had just been written, and that was the moment everything changed. Because when a role player walks away, people forget. When a superstar walks away, people debate. But when a player like Wembanyama walks away, the league starts asking bigger questions. Was this immaturity? Was this competitive fire? Was this disrespect? Or was this the first public sign that Wemby was no longer willing to play the part of the polite young phenom everyone wanted him to be? Jalen Brunson reportedly looked for him after the final buzzer. That matters, because Brunson had earned the right to be respected. He had led the Knicks through pressure, chaos, and expectation. He had beaten Wembanyama on the biggest stage. And in the old school basketball world, that moment after the buzzer means something. You battle, you compete, you lose. Then you look the winner in the eye, but Wembanyama was already gone. To some fans, that was unacceptable. To others, it was exactly what they wanted to see. Because they did not see a sore loser, they saw a young killer who could not fake peace with a moment that had just ripped him apart. And that is why this story exploded. Not because Wemby lost, but because he made losing look personal. The lesson that burned. When Wembanyama finally sat down at the podium, the room expected sadness. Maybe excuses, maybe a polite answer about respecting the Knicks, maybe a calm statement about learning from the experience and coming back stronger. But what reporters got was something sharper. Wembanyama did not sound like a player trying to escape responsibility. He sounded like someone replaying every mistake in his mind in real time. He talked about the defeat like it was a wound, but also like it was a classroom. He admitted this was the biggest learning moment of his life. Not his NBA life, not his basketball life, his life. That is a heavy statement from a two-year-old who has already lived under more basketball pressure than almost anyone his age. But the most revealing part was not the emotion. It was the detail. Wembanyama knew exactly where the Spurs had failed. They did not get destroyed. They did not look overmatched for the entire series. They did not walk into the finals and discover they were not ready to compete. That would have been easier to accept. Instead, San Antonio kept building leads, kept controlling stretches, kept making New York look uncomfortable. And then, over and over again, the Spurs let the door crack open. Against an ordinary team, maybe you survive that. Against a championship team, you pay for every mistake. That was the lesson Wemby could not shake. The margin of error at the top of the NBA is not small. It is almost invisible. One bad possession, one missed rotation, one rush shot, one moment of panic, one failure to close. That is all it takes. And that is why his frustration felt so different. He was not angry because the Knicks were better every second of the series. He was angry because the Spurs had enough to win and still did not know how to finish. That kind of loss can haunt a young star, but it can also build one because talent gets you to the stage. Pain teaches you how to survive there. And when Wembanyama said he was learning more than ever before, it did not sound like a media answer. It sounded like the beginning of a problem for the rest of the league. Stephen A. saw the weakness. Long before the handshake debate, Stephen A. Smith had already become one of the loudest voices in the Wembanyama conversation. And to understand why those 5 words felt so powerful, you have to understand what Wemby had been hearing all season. The praise was everywhere. Generational alien. Future face of the NBA. A defensive monster with guard skills. A player who could change the geometry of basketball, but praise in the NBA always comes with a shadow. The higher they lift you, the harder they search for the flaw. And for Wembanyama, that flaw was always the same. His body. Stephen A. did not question whether Wemby had talent. Nobody serious could question that. The handle was real. The shooting touch was real. The rim protection was terrifying. The court vision was ahead of schedule. But Smith kept circling back to the same concern. Could that frame survive the violence of deep playoff basketball? Could Wembanyama take the hits? Could he hold his ground when veterans leaned into him, grabbed him, bumped him, tested him, and tried to wear him down possession after possession? That was the question. And when Smith asked where the physical strength was, fans split immediately. Some believed he was telling the truth. Others believed the goalposts were moving, because what else was Wemby supposed to prove? He had changed the Spurs' entire future. He had turned defense into must-watch television. He had made San Antonio relevant again. He had dragged a young roster into championship conversations faster than almost anyone expected. And still, the biggest national conversation was not about how impossible he was to guard. It was about whether he had enough weight on his body. That is the burden of being called the future. Good is never good enough. Great is only the beginning. Every weakness becomes a national debate. Every emotional reaction becomes evidence. Every loss becomes a triumph. And for Wembanyama, Stephen A. was not just a critic. He became the symbol of every question the basketball world still had about him. Was he ready? Was he tough enough? Could he lead? Could he finish? The finals did not answer all of those questions, but they made one thing clear. Wemby was listening. Draymond understood the double standard. Draymond Green saw something in the Wembanyama conversation that a lot of people missed. He saw the double standard. When Wemby talked about defense being half of the game, some people acted like the league had just discovered a secret. Suddenly, analysts were saying maybe his MVP case was stronger than they thought. Suddenly, people were rethinking what impact really means. But Draymond's point was simple. Why did Wembanyama have to say it himself before people took it seriously? Defense has always been half the game. Rim protection has always mattered. Changing shots has always mattered. Making opponents afraid to drive has always mattered. But in the modern NBA conversation, offense gets the spotlight. Step back threes, 40-point nights, low goal range. highlight, passes. That is what travels fastest on social media. Wembanyama's greatness was different. He did not just score. He erased options. He made players think twice before they even entered the paint. He turned normal driving lanes into danger zone. He changed the emotional rhythm of games without touching the ball. That is why Draymond defended the bigger idea behind Wemby's MVP argument. Not because Wemby needed sympathy, but because the media often rewards the loudest numbers before it rewards the deepest impact, and that is where the story became even more complicated. Because Draymond could defend Wemby's greatness and still later criticize his decision to leave the floor. That is what made this entire drama feel real. Nobody was fully on one side. Stephen A. questioned Wemby's build, but defended him when things went too far. Draymond defended Wemby's defensive value, but believed he should have shown respect after the final. Jay Williams saw the walk-off as raw, competitive pain. Others saw it as a failure of leadership. That is why the debate lasted. It was not simple. Wembanyama was not a villain. Stephen A. was not just a hater. Draymond was not just taking side. Everyone was reacting to the same uncomfortable truth. Wemby was no longer being judged like a promising young player. He was being judged like the face of the league. And once that standard arrives, it never leaves. The playoffs turned into a survival test. By the time the Spurs reached the deeper rounds, the playoffs had stopped feeling like basketball and started feeling like a physical examination of Victor Wembanyama's limits. Every team had the same question. How much contact could he take? Could they push him off his spots? Could they frustrate him? Could they drag him into emotional waters he had never had to swim through before? The Timberwolves series became the clearest example. It was rough. It was tense. It was the kind of playoff battle where every screen felt heavier, every box out felt personal, and every possession carried a little extra heat. Wembanyama was being grabbed, bumped, crowded, tested, and eventually, the frustration boiled over. The ejection became one of the biggest moments of his postseason. For critics, it was proof that he still had growing to do. For supporters, it was proof that the league had allowed too much contact before he finally reacted. But the most interesting detail was his reaction after the call. He looked confused, not because he thought nothing had happened, but because he had never really been in that situation before. That matters. Wembanyama was not known as a reckless player. He was not a veteran enforcer. He was not someone who built his identity around intimidation. He was a young superstar being introduced to the darker edge of playoff basketball. The place where opponents do not just guard you, they study your patience. They test your pride. They try to find the exact moment where your talent gets interrupted by emotion. That is what happened. And even Stephen A. Smith, who had questioned Wemby's physical strength, did not pile on the way some people expected. He agreed the ejection made sense, but he did not want a suspension deciding the series. That was important because it showed Stephen A.'s issue with Wemby was not personal hatred, it was expectation. He wanted the young star available. He wanted the series decided on the floor. He understood that the NBA was better when Wembanyama was playing, not watching. And in a strange way, that moment helped define Wemby's postseason. He was not just being tested by basketball. He was being tested by pressure, contact, criticism, and the responsibility of becoming the player everyone already expected him to be. When the line was crossed, then came the moment that had nothing to do with basketball. After a painful finals loss, outside the team hotel near Madison Square Garden, a fan incident involving Wembanyama turned the conversation from competition to basic respect. And this time, there was no real debate. Passion is part of sports. Trash talk is part of sports. Booing is part of sports. New York especially is built on noise, edge, and emotional pressure. But there is a line, and when fans cross that line, the game becomes something uglier than rivalry. Wembanyama made that clear. He did not ask for special treatment. He did not act like fans could not be intense. He simply reminded everyone of the truth people forget when sports become too tribal. It is still a game. The players are still people. The uniform does not make someone a target. The scoreboard does not erase basic decency. And that is where Stephen A. Smith came in with one of his strongest defenses of Wembanyama. He condemned the behavior completely. He called for better protection around players. And just as importantly, he made sure not to blame the entire Knicks fan base for the actions of a few people. That distinction mattered because the best sports cities are passionate, not reckless. They make the atmosphere unforgettable, not unsafe. They push opponents mentally, not personally. And Smith, as someone who understands New York sports culture better than almost anyone on television, knew that difference. This moment changed the tone of the story. Before that, people were arguing about Wemby's body, his maturity, his MVP case, his playoff reactions. But the hotel incident reminded everyone that the spotlight around him had become enormous. Everywhere he went, he was watched. Every reaction became content. Every public moment became a test. That is a lot for any athlete. It is even more for a two-year-old carrying the expectations of a franchise, a country, and maybe the future of the league. The irony is that Stephen A., one of Wemby's loudest critics, became one of his loudest defenders when the situation demanded it. And that made the final handshake debate even more intense, because now the story was not about whether Stephen A. hated Wemby. He clearly did not. The story became about standard. How much does the future face of the NBA owe the game, even when the game has just broken his heart? The handshake debate split. The handshake debate was not really about a handshake. That is why it got so big. On the surface, it looked simple. The Knicks won. The Spurs lost. Wembanyama left the court without greeting the champions. Some people said that was poor sportsmanship. Others said it was raw competitiveness. But underneath that argument was a much bigger question. What do we want our superstars to be? Do we want them emotional or polished? Honest or media trained? Devastated or respectful? Human or perfect? Stephen A. Smith believed Wembanyama should have stayed. To him, being the face of the NBA comes with responsibilities that go beyond the box score. You compete with everything you have, but when the battle ends, you honor the opponent who beat you. That is the standard. And honestly, it is a fair standard. Championship basketball has history. Magic and Bird, Jordan and Isaiah, LeBron, and the Warriors. Every era has moments where respect after war becomes part of the story. Draymond Green agreed. And that surprised some fans, because Draymond has made a career out of emotional intensity, but maybe that is exactly why his opinion mattered. He knows the difference between fire and the line you are still expected to recognize. But Jay Williams and Kendrick Perkins saw it differently. They understood the pain. They understood that Wemby was not walking away from a regular season loss in January. He was walking away from the NBA Finals, from blown leads, from a championship that felt close enough to touch, from the realization that he might have to wait nearly 100 games just to earn another chance at the same moment. That number mattered. 100 games. That is the emotional distance between heartbreak and redemption. Training camp, regular season, injuries, travel, back-to-backs, playoff rounds, pressure, adjustments, nothing guaranteed. So when Wemby walked off, maybe he was not disrespecting New York. Maybe he was being swallowed by the weight of knowing how far away the next opportunity really was. That does not automatically make it right, but it makes it understandable. And that is why the debate hit so hard. Wembanyama gave everyone a mirror. Old school fans saw disrespect. Modern fans saw authenticity. Critics saw immaturity. Supporters saw hunger. But the league saw something else. A superstar whose every move now has consequences. The season that changed everything. Lost in all the noise was the most important fact. Victor Wembanyama had just completed one of the most remarkable young superstar seasons the league had seen in years. The drama was loud. The debates were everywhere, but the basketball was undeniable. This was not empty hype anymore. This was production. This was impact. This was winning. Wembanyama took the Spurs from a rebuilding team into a legitimate force. He turned San Antonio into must-watch television. He gave the franchise a new identity almost overnight. On defense, he was terrifying, not just because he blocked shots, but because he changed decisions. Players drove into the lane and suddenly remembered he existed. Guards who normally attacked without fear started floating awkward shots. Big men rushed finishes. Wings pulled up early. Entire offensive systems bent around the question of where Wemby was standing. That is not normal defense. That is gravitational defense. And offensively, he kept expanding. He could score inside, shoot over contests, handle in transition, pass out of pressure, create mismatches that no coach could solve cleanly. Too tall for wings, too skilled for centers, too strange for traditional basketball language. But what made the season truly important was not the awards or the number. It was the speed of the transformation. The Spurs did not just become better. They became relevant at the highest level. And once they reached the finals, the world got to see both sides of Wembanyama's future. The terrifying upside and the painful lesson still waiting for him. He put up elite finals numbers. He protected the rim. He carried pressure. He showed flashes that made people wonder how anyone is supposed to deal with him once he fully understands every playoff coverage, every physical trick, every late game possession. But he also learned that talent does not close games by itself. Young teams can dominate for 36 minutes and still lose in the final 6. A superstar can be brilliant and still need more poise, more execution, more help, more patience. That is not failure. That is the price of becoming great. The greatest players are not built only by the nights they win. They are shaped by the nights they cannot forget. And this finals loss is now part of Wembanyama's foundation. Every blown lead, every criticism, every replay of him walking into the tunnel, every clip of those 5 words, all of it becomes fuel. And that is the scariest part, because the league did not just watch Wemby lose, it watched him collect reasons to come back different. The warning hidden inside the loss. The real story is not that Victor Wembanyama lost the NBA Finals. The real story is what this loss may turn him into, because every great NBA career has a moment like this. A moment where talent is no longer enough. A moment where the league stops admiring you and starts challenging you. A moment where the cameras, critics, veterans, fans, and pressure all close in at the same time. For Wembanyama, this was that moment. The Knicks exposed something important. Not that Wemby is overrated. Not that the Spurs were fake contender. Not that Stephen A. Smith was right about every concern. They exposed the difference between being good enough to reach the finals and being mature enough to win them. That difference is where championships live. San Antonio had the talent to scare New York. They had leads. They had momentum. They had a generational player capable of changing the game on both ends. But closing is a separate skill. Championship teams do not just play well, they survive bad minutes. They stay calm when the building gets loud. They punish mistakes without making bigger ones. They know when to slow down, when to attack, when to trust the system, and when the superstar has to take over. That is the strategic lesson for the Spurs. They do not need to panic. They need to grow. They need more late game discipline, more veteran steadiness, more emotional control, more offensive counters when defenses load up on Wemby. And Wembanyama himself needs to take the pain and sharpen it into leadership. Not just blocks, not just points, not just highlights, leadership. The kind that keeps a team together after a 1-2 point lead disappears. The kind that walks into a hostile arena and does not rush. The kind that understands respect is not weakness. And that is the human lesson too. Competition should be fierce, but it should not become hatred. Fans can be passionate without crossing the line. Analysts can criticize without dehumanizing players. Players can hurt deeply and still learn to honor the game. Because basketball is at its best when greatness and respect exist together. Wembanyama is young. He made emotional choices. He felt the full weight of losing. But nothing about this story suggests he is finished. It suggests the opposite. He has now seen the summit. He has felt how cold it is to stand one step away and fall. And when a player that talented carries that kind of memory into an offseason, the rest of the NBA should pay attention. Stephen A. Smith may have questioned him. Draymond may have challenged him. The media may have dissected him. Fans may have argued over him. But one truth is becoming harder to deny. Victor Wembanyama is coming. And if this is what he looks like in defeat, the league better be ready for what he becomes after the lesson. If you believe Wemby will come back stronger and eventually win a championship, type 1 in the comments. If you think the pressure will only get heavier from here, type 2. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, share it with another NBA fan, and subscribe for more stories from the biggest drama, rivalries, and turning points around the league.